All right, welcome back. So last video we talked about the naming things and why naming things is important and how to stick with consistently use a naming style and a naming convention. I should have mentioned style guides. If you'd like to know more, you can search the Tidyverse, if I could spell correctly, Tidyverse style guide. And so this gives you just overview of, for instance, like how to name files, some different syntax. This is you don't have to read this whole thing. This is a lot, but especially if you're going to end up one day developing R code, you should be familiar with the Tidyverse style guide. But anyway, so that's kind of calling back to the idea of naming things. What we want to get into today, or in this video, is that we have the using verbs should make sort of like a components of a complete sentence, and the verbs in R are functions. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to write functions today. I mean, we will do that a little bit, but we have an entire lesson down here dedicated to functions. So this is more getting into why functions exist, if you will, and how do we document them. That's the most important thing, because this is all about organization and documenting for your projects. So that's why we need to talk about functions, particularly for documentation. So we've heard multiple times now that everything in R is an object. Now, I had wrestled with this statement for years, and I'm not 100% sure that this statement is correct, but I have yet to find a counterexample. And I've been writing R code for a very, very long time. And this statement is everything you do in R calls a function. If there's an action that happens, a function is called somewhere. Um, and I really can't, outside of like the distinction that sometimes functions aren't actually functions, but they're in fact primitives or closures or specials or something like that, where it's not a function in R, it's a function maybe in C. At the end of the day, it's still a function happening somewhere. So I think I want to stand by the statement that everything you do in R calls a function. Again, maybe in a few years, someone finally shows me a counterexample to this. But for now, I think this is a true statement. I'm slightly less confident in it. I know that everything in R is an object, that I know in my bones. But I'm pretty confident that everything you do in R will call a function at some point if there's an action that happens. Okay, so I want to think about an English sentence right here. And the English sentence is Tammy hit the ball hard. Now, this is a complete sentence. We have a complete thought right here in these 5 words. So the noun is Tammy, the verb is hit, the ball is the direct object, and technically there's an adjective right here. And then there's an adverb to describe how Tammy hit the ball. So this adverb is modifying the verb, or it is telling people how this action was done. Okay, so in R parlance, like in the analog in R, we have the verb as the primary function. The direct object is the function output. That's on the left-hand side of the assignment operator. So if we say x gets a function of y or something like that, then the x would be the function output. That's the result of the action. And then your the primary argument is probably the noun, and then secondary arguments are these adverbs that control how the function does what it does. So this is kind of a little bizarre, but let's get into an example here. So I want to build this matrix down here. This is the result of the action. The result of the action will be this object, and it's going to be my data underscore mat, because it's a matrix, so I'm naming it underscore mat for matrix. And here's the verb. This is the piece of R code that's actually doing the work. This is the action. The action is create a matrix. Well, create a matrix of what? Well, that's going to be this subject right here. Create a matrix of zeros. And then the question of how should the action be done? Well, Tammy hit the ball hard. That's how Tammy hit the ball. That's these adverbs right here. So how should a matrix of zeros be made? Well, it should be made with 5 rows and 2 columns. So this is sort of the diagram of a sentence in R. We have, well, this is the subject. It's a whole bunch of zeros. Well, what's happening? We are making a matrix of that whole bunch of zeros. How are we doing it? We're putting the zeros into 5 rows and 2 columns. And then what is returned? The resulting object of this action is a matrix called my data. That's just a matrix of zeros. Okay. So we call the function matrix. This is a verb. And then we've got the nouns, which is the data, and then we've got some adverbs that control how the verb should work. Okay, so I have an exercise for you. I want you to take a minute and I want you to go through this code that we've already seen. We saw this code a few videos ago, and this is a complete sentence. We remember that this creates a scatter plot of the highway miles per gallon versus the engine displacement. But I want you to think about, where are the verbs? Where are the subjects? Where are the objects? I mean, what are the pieces of this code here? What are they each doing? So take a minute. So you've had a second to label all of the components of this code and discuss with your neighbors. So hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of what's going on in this code and how it works. So our very first function, we are, again, we're not going to really think about writing functions so much, but we're going to think about more why functions exist and how do we explain that to other people. So functions have the following syntax. They use the word function. I mean, that seems pretty logical. And then there are arguments. Then there's these fancy curly braces. And then there's a whole bunch of expressions right here that we're calling the body of the function. That's actually what does the work. Now, in some previous videos, we have talked about this. When we think about the anatomy of a function, we say, okay, well, functions have a name, they have some arguments, they have a body, they have some expressions. Okay, and so we can create our own function. We can create a sum, like where we just add up 2 numbers. And so we say, okay, well, I need 2 arguments here. I need to make sure that if I'm going to add 2 numbers, I've got to have 2 numbers, right? So I'm going to have x and y, and I know that my function is going to be x plus y, or the sum of x and y. And so I save this, and I say, okay, this is my function. And so then I call my function right here. I'm going to take a pause here. There is a verb, my summary function. There are 2 subjects, 2 and 3, but according to our example, there's no direct object. There's no object being saved here. It's just being returned to the console. So understand that not every single time, just like in English, there can be sentences where you just have the subject and you just have the verb. In that case, like Jack ran. It's 2 words, a complete sentence. The subject is Jack, the verb is ran. In this case, this function will work with just the subjects, 2 and 3, and just the function. Add them together. There's nothing being saved here. Okay. Now we want to think about this, and one of the reason why we want to write functions is because most of the time, outside of downloading a whole bunch of add-ins, R by itself cannot do what you need it to do for advanced statistical methods. Now, the beautiful thing is somebody has already probably figured out how to do what you need to do. You just need to go find the package that does it. But let's say, for argument's sake, that nobody has figured out how to solve the problem that you need to solve. You still can do it because R is extendable. R is a functional language, and we can make our own function to solve our problem. Okay, so here's some exercises. I want you to create a function here, and then I want you to play around with this. So we're going to, I think this is a good place to pause for now, and then we're going to get into like how to write functions shortly. All right. See you soon.